Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Now, I spent all of yesterday morning, shall we say, rehearsing and resetting the stage for understanding how incredibly important it is to realize that Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is based upon the expectation of the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Now, for instance, I've already spent time demonstrating that in Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, we have the gathering of the nations. Well, guess where do we get that from? Where do we get the idea of the gathering of the nations at the day of the Lord? Oh, Joel chapter 3, actually chapter 2 and 3. In the last days, at the great day of the Lord, I will gather all nations to judgment. So in the last days, and we are told by amillennialists, postmillennialists, etc., that the last days are the Christian age. Well, so ostensibly, in the Christian age, at the end of the Christian age, God said, I will gather all nations to judgment. So if that's what Joel is teaching, isn't that what Matthew 25 is teaching? And thus, once again, Matthew 25 is indeed anticipating the fulfillment of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. Now, I'm not going to go into an exegesis of Joel chapter 2 and 3. We've gone over that territory, but I want to move on this morning to illustrate for us. Okay, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is the same day of the Lord, the parousia, as 2 Peter chapter 3. Peter is about the parousia of Christ in the last days. Matthew chapter 25, the parousia of Christ in the last days. No question whatsoever. We are dealing with the same identical event. No question. Okay, so I've already shared with you how 2 Peter chapter 3 begins by telling us, Peter did, this second epistle I've written unto you, brethren, both of which to stir up your holy minds by way of remembrance, that you would remember the words of our Lord and of the holy prophets who have spoken before. So whatever 2 Peter 3 is about, it is about what Jesus taught, it is about what the apostles said, and it is also about what the Old Covenant prophets said. I've shared with you how Peter says in the last days scoffers would come, according to the scriptures. According to the Old Testament. Isaiah 28 predicted the coming of scoffers in the last days. And oh, by the way, Paul in Acts chapter 3 said the scoffers were present then. Now look, folks, it's not some vague generic statement that says all during the entirety of the Christian age, scoffers would be present. No. In the last days. Last days doesn't mean 2,000, 3,000 years, 10 billion years. Last days indicates last days. Okay. So Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, after describing the day of the Lord, in which the earth and the elements that are therein shall be burned up. Peter tells us, seeing then that all of these things shall be dissolved, what manner of men ought we to be in righteousness and holiness? Nevertheless, according to his promise, we look for a new heavens and a new earth. Now look, I'm not going to have time to develop everything, obviously, but let me recommend to you that you go to my website, donkpreston.com or bibleprophecy.com, and you get a copy of my book entitled The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. To my knowledge, and that may be limited, but to my knowledge, it is the only full preterist commentary on 2 Peter chapter 3 that has been produced. So take advantage of it, and if you order the book, send me a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and for U.S. orders only, continental U.S. orders only, I'll refund your shipping and save you $5. So Peter says, according to his promise, Now remember, he's reminding us of what not only Jesus but the apostles said, but he's reminding us of what the Old Testament prophets said. And the most explicit Old Testament prophecy of the new heaven and the new earth, according to the consensus of virtually all scholars, is Isaiah 65. So here in a nutshell, thumbnail version. Oh, sorry about that. I split my thumb open on an old car part the other day. Whoo, boy, did that thing bleed. Anyway, in a nutshell, here's what we have. Peter was looking for the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies of the new heaven and new earth. Isaiah 65, Isaiah 6 are the most explicit, the most emphatic, the clearest cut Old Testament prophecies of the day of the Lord and the coming of the new heaven and new earth. Now, does that mean that Isaiah 65 and 66 are the only Old Testament prophecies of the new heaven and new earth? No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, Isaiah 43 is an absolutely incredible text. And it promises that God, in fact, God told Israel, forget the former things. I am going to create a new thing, which has never been brought to mind. I'm going to do something that's never been done. Okay? And on it goes. And by the way, in Acts chapter 1, the angel, as Jesus ascends into heaven, actually just immediately before Jesus ascended, he said to his apostles, you are my witnesses. Direct citation of Isaiah 43:10. So, anyway, the whole point there being that, yes, indeed, there are other Old Testament prophecies that teach the coming of a, quote, new thing. But the direct terminology, new heaven, new earth, is only found in Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66. So we're going to use that as the basis of our examination. So here in Isaiah 65, and again, I cover this very, very extensively in my book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. In Isaiah 65, God begins that chapter by saying, I am found of those that did not look for me. What is this a comment about? God is saying that the time is going to come in which he was going to call the Gentiles. Why? Well, because he says, all day long I have stretched out my hands to a gainsaying and disobedient people who walked in their own paths, who when I called they would not answer. So God, speaking of Israel, said, I called to them, they refused to answer, therefore I'm going to call a people to myself that has never called on me, that I have never known. They have never served me. Folks, that's the Gentiles. How do I know that? Well, because in Romans chapter 10, 21 and 22, Paul quotes Isaiah 65, 1 and 2, verbatim, to speak, number one, of Israel's rebellion and rejection of the gospel of Christ, and point number two, the subsequent calling of the Gentiles. So for Paul, Isaiah 65, now you got to catch this for where we're going. For Paul, Isaiah 65 spoke of Israel of his generation, and it spoke of the calling of the Gentiles in his generation through his personal ministry. It wasn't talking about the return from the Babylonian captivity. No. The Gentiles were not called to Yahweh in the return from the Babylonian captivity. And as we shall see as we proceed, nothing else in Isaiah 65 fits the return from the Babylonian captivity, as some have suggested. It just doesn't work. And when the New Testament writers call on Isaiah 65, when they cite it, they allude to it, they echo it over and over and over to refer to the events of their generation, the first century generation, then it seems to me that it's invalid to make the ultimate fulfillment of Isaiah 65 to be some kind of return from Babylonian captivity. It just doesn't work. So, here is Paul applying Isaiah 65, 1 and 2 to his ministry, calling the Gentiles as a result of Israel's rebellion in the first century. Now, there's a whole lot of other stuff leading up to that, but look, I could take literally weeks and weeks and weeks simply exegeting of Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66. Just get the book, The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. I just want to hit some real critical highlights. The Lord once again said, speaking of Israel, you are those that when I called, you did not answer. And he describes Israel's rebellion against him as idolatry. And some people say, oh, well, this must have applied to the situation of Israel prior to the fall of Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians, because that's when Israel was guilty of idolatry. Well, that sounds plausible on the initial surface of it. The only trouble of it is, once again, it doesn't work when we come to the New Testament application of Isaiah 65. So God says, you are those who worship in the gardens, and you eat pork. I'm personally glad that law has been done away with. But on and on, God accused Israel of sinning, rebelling against his word. And so he says, behold, my servants shall eat, you shall be hungry. Behold, my servants shall drink, you shall be thirsty. Behold, my servants shall sing for joy, you shall wail for sorrow of heart. So here is God's threat. Is it against the globe? Is it against human beings of every nation? Is it against America? No. He was speaking to Israel in violation of Torah. And he says, my servants, and he has described the servants in that text, Isaiah 65, verse 8, as the righteous remnant of Israel, those who humbled themselves before God and obeyed his word. So this is a prediction of the time of the salvation of the righteous remnant, which, by the way, Paul applied to his generation in the first century. And here's something absolutely incredible. Once again, my servants shall eat, you'll be hungry. My servants shall drink, you're going to be thirsty. My servants shall sing for joy of heart, you're going to wail for sorrow of heart. What we have described here is the Messianic Banquet. Now watch this. Messianic Banquet is taken from Isaiah 25, 6 and following. On this mountain, Mount Zion, I will prepare a great feast, a feast of wine on the lees, a feast of fat things. And I will remove the curse that is passed upon all nations, and I will destroy death. The Messianic Banquet is at the time of the resurrection. Now watch this. This is a direct lead-in to where we're going. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, a centurion, a pagan, a Gentile, came to Jesus saying, Master, my servant is lying at home, sick. Please come and heal him. Or please heal him. And Jesus said, well, let's go to your house. And he said, no, not necessary. I am a man under authority. I say to this man, he goes, go, and he goes. I say to this man, come, and he comes. Just speak the word only, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus said, I have not found so great a faith, no, not in all of Israel. And verily I say unto you, many shall come from the east and from the west. See, this is a contrast here to Israel. Many shall come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom, and the sons of the kingdom will be cast out. Wait a minute. Isaiah 65, my servant shall eat, you will be hungry. My servant shall drink, you shall be thirsty. Matthew chapter 8. People coming from the east and the west, sitting down at the Messianic wedding banquet. When? When the sons of the kingdom would be cast out. Wait a minute, Isaiah 65. I will number you, Old Covenant Israel, to the slaughter. More on that tomorrow. All right, right now, I'm out of time. Don't forget, get your own copy of The Elements Shall Melt with Fervent Heat. You'll be absolutely amazed at how powerful the testimony is. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.